we are going to set the ball rolling on separation of powers. So someone to read out the first question on separation of powers.
Well, the first question was like, explain what's the doctrine of separation of power according to Baron Monticus.
Okay, so that question is simply referring you to what separation of powers is. And the reason why we are making reference to Baron Montesquieu is simply because he's the one who postulated the doctrine of separation of powers. So he's the one who introduced the doctrine of separation of powers. This, of course, was after he took some time to study the system of governance. So he was trying to recommend the best way through which a government could be run to try and avoid what is known as tyranny or abuse of power by the people in authority. And please switch off your videos. Switch off your videos. If your video is on, please switch it off or I'll remove you from the meeting. All right. So Baron Montesquieu is the man behind the doctrine of separation of powers. That is why we're referring to him. So anyone to give us the answer for the first question? Anyone, please feel free. This is a class. I don't expect you to hold back. Feel free, we discussed. This is also part of learning. Learning is just about the same person talking and talking each time. No. Sharon Mukuka, turn off your video. If your videos are on, I'll just remove you from the meeting. Yes? Someone to give it a try? What is the doctrine of separation of powers? We don't have much time. We don't have much time, so can we quickly answer the questions?
Good afternoon, madam.
Good afternoon, thank you.
I can try.
Yes, please go ahead.
It's a division of responsibilities into government. So basically, you get the judiciary is executing their own what do you call it? Their own agenda. Then we have the executive, which is the president running the affairs of the government. Then we have the concentration, like what do you call it? The others that execute the state functions. That like the branches are limited. Especially, I know more about the judiciary. They have to be independent. Then the executive, but there must be 3. I don't know. Thank you, madam.
Thank you so much. Anyone else?
Yes, madam. I think separation of power is about the 3 organs to work independently to enable proper check and balance. Yeah, and these 3 organs. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much. So in short, what you are saying is that it is the division of governmental power into 3 organs, namely the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. But if we have to define it in its strict sense, according to Baron Montesquieu, there are 3 main things which he brought out. Of course, the general one is that the division of governmental powers into the 3 organs. And the second thing that you need to note is the actual ingredients of separation of powers, where he said, firstly, no person must belong to more than one organ of government. Secondly, no organ must exercise the functions of the other organs. And the third one, the third meaning that he gave to separation of powers is that no organ must interfere with the exercise of power by the other organ. Those are the three things that I mainly look for. If I was to ask you a question in the examination to talk about the meaning given by Baron Montesquieu. So basically, that's what I was expecting under the first question. So this simply means that if you were writing an examination, then possibly if this was out of 10, the maximum you are going to get is maybe 1 or 2 because you've completely not brought out the meaning of separation of powers according to Baron Montesquieu. That's why it is very important for you to be participating in class when I give you questions, because from the questions that I give you, those are some of the questions that you will come across in the exam. And also, I will try as much as possible to be explaining to you how I expect you to answer during exams. So that's the first question. Can you go to the second question?
Madam, just hold on a bit.
Yes, please.
The system logged me out, so I didn't get the meaning of the separation of powers according to Baron Montesquieu.
All right, I'm recording this session, so if you miss something, please just wait for the link to be posted for this session. It's recorded. I think you can see the record button showing there. So if you've missed it, I'll give you the link.
All right.
The next question, someone to read out the next question. Yes, please. Go ahead.
Identify the three organs of government and explain.
Can you finish?
The second question reads.
Yes.
Yes. Identify the three organs of government and explain the composition and structure of each organ.
All right. Anyone to give it a shot? First of all, what are the three organs of government?
Can I try, Madam?
Go ahead.
The legislature, the judiciary, and the executive.
All right. What is the function of the executive? What does the executive do?
Make sure that the rules are carried out.
It formulates policy. Who makes up the executive? Who belongs to the executive? Yes, Abraham, you want to say something?
Yes, Madam.
Yes, please.
The function of the executives, they simply carry out laws. When the legislature they make laws, they will carry out the law. And,
what do you mean carry out the law?
They simply interpret the law.
No, that's not the executive. Maybe you're talking about the judiciary now. But thank you so much for your contribution. Enforcing, yes, you can say enforcing, because we do find the police under the executive, and the police are law enforcement officers. So the best description we can give to the executive is that the executive is the body that formulates policy. It is the brain of the government. which plans and spearheads all the other organs of government. And the executive happens to be the most powerful and influential organ of government. Can we have the composition? Who belongs to the executive? Who belongs to the executive?
President.
Yes. The president, that's true. The ministers, correct. Cabinet, civil service, yes. That is true. Now let's go to the other organ, the legislature. That is the correct pronunciation. Do not struggle to pronounce. Legislature, not registration. So legislature simply refers to parliament. What does parliament do?
Makes laws.
Yes. So in short, the function of the legislature is to make laws. We find members of parliament there, and of course we find the Speaker of the National Assembly who heads it, and so on. And then we have the last organ, which one of you mentioned to say.
Just a quick question.
Yes, please.
What's the difference between the National Assembly and the Parliament?
That question actually is civics. I think should have looked at it in secondary. But when the president is not present, it becomes National Assembly with just the leader of governmental business, who is the vice president. And when it is parliament, which means the president is present. So any other questions? Samuel Muntari, I don't know who this person is. What you need to note is that when a session is being recorded, be mindful of the comments you are making, because this recording is going on the platform and all the comments will equally appear on Clanet. So I would appreciate if you restrict yourself to strictly academic issues when I'm teaching. I hope we're together. Samuel, can you hear me? Is Samuel here? So can we please observe the highest level of discipline as we are in class? Thank you so much. So that is the difference between Parliament and National Assembly. But this, of course, is it is under I think civics. For us, it was civics. Now it is civic education. But that is the main difference between the two. Any other questions? Are there any other questions? Okay, then we go to the judiciary, which your colleague mentioned that it has to be independent. What does the judiciary do? Abraham, you have a question? Yes, please. Go ahead.
Who is the head of legislature?
The head
of legislature.
The head of the legislature. Wow, that is a very good question.
Yes.
Well, the head of the legislature, let me see how I can easily explain that. Maybe it depends from what angle you look at it. But the one who is the head of Parliament or National Assembly, for example, is the Speaker. The Speaker is the one who presides over all matters. When you look at the executive, there's the president there. But for Parliament, the main person who oversees all the proceedings and so on is the Speaker. And when it comes to the making of laws, of course, a law will pass through the appropriate procedures. But if one person known as the president does not assent to a law, then it might not be a law. But the president comes right at the tail end of the lawmaking process. And in this case, we'll say that the speaker heads the legislature, because when we say legislature, we're referring to Parliament, which is a body that makes laws. And you need to know that a speaker is normally a senior lawyer. Any other questions? Okay, so now we can look at the judiciary. Abraham Kawe, you were saying something about interpreting laws. So the executive does not interpret laws, but it is the judiciary. Mainly here we refer to judges, but of course we have other legal personnel. Some of the people we find under the legal profession, they fall under the judiciary. The main issue is to interpret the law and also to protect citizens as much as possible. Why? Because in the executive and the legislature, we find politicians. But in the judiciary, for a person to hold the office of judge, he must not hold any political office or be involved in active politics at the time when he or she is holding office. And the judiciary is the body which is expected to protect the law and protect the welfare of the citizens. No wonder we say that there has to be independence of the judiciary, because it is the only organ which perhaps might act more objectively away from the influence of politics. And it is hoped that that is achieved in reality. So these are the three organs of government, and we've talked about their functions and their composition. Can we go to the next question? Someone to read out the next question.
The next question says, discuss the functions of the president of Zambia under the Zambian constitution.
Yes, please, someone to answer that question. What are some of the functions of a Zambian president? Maybe someone in here would like to vie for the presidential office. So you need to know in advance what you'll be doing as head of state. Someone to give us the functions of the president.
One of the
Yes,
functions
please.
is to negotiate
Yes.
and sign treaties.
Sorry?
One of the functions is to negotiate and sign treaties.
Yes, treaties. These are agreements with other countries, correct? Any other functions of the president? What does the president do?
Another function that the president has is that he's able to appoint ministers as well as fire them.
He appoints ministers, yes.
And he's also able to fire them if they're in the wrong, or maybe they're due to misconduct or something like that.
Okay, I've got one function. He appoints ministers. The second one?
He's able to fire the ministers due to misconduct.
He acts as the commander-in-chief in case of war.
Okay, so he is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, correct? There's also another answer here that he can also appoint judges. That is true. He does appoint judges, and he also removes them from office. And the other one is that the president may at any time summon a meeting of the National Assembly. Yes, of course, maybe during a state of emergency. That is true. Any other contributions on the functions of the president?
Welcoming of delegates into the country.
Sorry?
Welcoming of delegates into the country.
The coming of delegates into the country. Okay, maybe because he is the head of state and government. Okay.
He's also a chief legislator.
He's also
A chief legislator.
or maybe you can say that he has to assent to every bill. for it to become law. So there are several functions of the president, and he represents the country at all official functions. That is the president. Okay, the next question. Yes, and he does dissolve parliament. And what's the next question?
Madam, I have a question.
Sorry?
I do have a question. In the functions and powers of the president, can you say that, can you clarify where you can say...
Just write a message. I think the network is bad. Just type that question. What is the next question?
Describe the relationship between the three arms of government.
Sorry?
Describe the relationship between the three arms of government.
Which function is that? And I've seen an answer here which is talking about Congress. Zambia does not have Congress. You are reading this from the American Constitution. That's why you're giving the wrong terms. You cannot say that the government, the president is responsible for the execution and enforcement of the laws created by Congress. We do not have Congress in Zambia. You need to be careful with which materials you are using. I told you last time to say you'll be making reference to Indian laws, yet we're talking about Zambian laws. So this is not correct to say created by Congress. No. Well, we might not say that powers and functions are the same, but I would say that at a certain point they may coincide, whereby a function is at the same time a power. But we can distinguish between functions and powers, but at one point they may coincide. Thank you so much for that question. Any other questions? Are there any other questions? Okay, let's go to the next question. Yes, prerogative of mercy is a power. That is correct. Presidential prerogative of mercy is a presidential power. That is true. Someone to read the next question. Yes, the president does appoint the vice president. Can you read the next question?
Yes. The next question reads, describe the relationship between the three arms of government.
Okay. Can someone answer that question? It's a straightforward question.
They hold checks and balances over one another.
Sorry?
They hold checks and balances.
Can we address the next question? Mukukamaiko Mlenga, I don't know which material you're referring to say, is the material on Clannad sufficient enough for our reading to pass exams? I don't know, which other material are you looking for? As far as I'm concerned, I've given the class enough material. If you're lacking material, consult your classmates. Maybe you join the class date. The next question on the relationship between the three organs of government, can we quickly answer that? Hello, can you hear me? Are you able to get me?
Yes, madam.
Yes, please. Can you respond?
I think the organs of government they have the relationship because they have to work together from local governments through decentralization, through policies. I think they have to work together for them to achieve or implementing their projects or programs. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, so that is very true. And mainly because the system of government in Zambia is a unitary system. It's a unitary state. It is different from other countries such as Nigeria, which are federal states. So in such a system, it is practically impossible to completely separate the three organs of government from each other. But there has to be sufficient interplay and interaction between them to keep the system moving. This simply means that, for example, the executive works with the legislature. When perhaps executive proposes something through a policy, it will be pushed down to parliament, which will pass that same policy into law. So we are seeing that there's cooperation between the executive and the legislature. And at a certain point, this same law will have to be applied. So at the point of application, if there's an anomaly, the judiciary might come in to interpret the law in such a manner that, if need be, it can suggest that a certain law be amended, like we saw in the case of Christine Mulunjika, where Section 5 of the Public Order Act was declared to be unconstitutional. So in this example, we are seeing that there's sufficient interplay between the three organs of government because we're talking about one and the same government. And it is not impossible that, it's not possible rather that we completely separate them, because how will they be able to execute their functions? So it also matters on the political arrangement that a certain country has for us to rule out the possibility of separation of powers, or maybe weak separation of powers or strong separation of powers. So the type of separation of powers that we have in Zambia is a weak separation of powers. But we may not say that there's no separation of powers at all. No, it is there, but it is just weak. Why? Because of the example that I have given, that from time to time, these people need to interact with each other. For example, when you talk about cabinet ministers, the same people will also sit in parliament as lawmakers. And this is simply because of the nature of our legal system. And we wouldn't say that that is democratic, really. So the safeguard that we have in ensuring that these bodies stick to their roles, it is through what is known as a system of balances. Each organ must act as the other. So, for example, the judiciary will always check on the functions of the executive. And if need be, they'll advise the executive as to what should happen. Remember, the judiciary is the independent organ. Sometimes we may have a situation whereby the legislature perhaps violates a certain procedure. The judiciary must come out independent and advise accordingly. So that system is known as the system of checks and balances, where each organ must keep an eye on the other. And when you look at a branch of law known as administrative law, we have deliberate systems which have been put in place whereby there's what is known as judicial control of executive actions. So they will normally scrutinize the actions of the executive. Why? Because the judiciary is there to ensure that the rule of law is upheld, separation of powers is upheld. It is there to ensure that governance is run according to the system of laws, because no one is above the law. Whether it is a president or not, the president is equally subject to the laws of Zambia. And there was a question to say, can the president be judged by a law or a judge? It is the law which is applicable. The judge is just a person who perhaps applies the law. So that is, I think, the fourth question. Can we go to the last question? We can go to the last question. . Can someone read the last question?
Okay. How? I'm sorry. How is the doctrine of separation violated in Zambia, and how can this be improved? How is the doctrine of separation of powers violated in Zambia, and how can this be improved?
Violation of the doctrine of separation of powers. I've already given you an example to say, for example, when cabinet ministers who belong to the executive sit in the legislature, that is a violation of the doctrine of separation of powers. Any other examples that you can point out? I gave you the meanings of separation of powers according to Baron Montesquieu. How else is this doctrine violated here in Zambia?
Can I try?
Yes, please.
An example can be in a case where a judge overrules some of the laws made by the parliament.
Sorry?
I'm
Maybe
saying,
you can.
yes, I'm saying maybe the president pardons the people that were sentenced by a judge.
Can you just type that? I can't get what you're saying. The network is not good.
I'm saying,
Yes.
I'm saying in a situation where people are sentenced and then the president comes and pardons them.
Oh, correct. When the president pardons maybe people who are still serving, he is performing a judicial function, but meanwhile he's the head of the executive. Thank you so much for that answer. How else is the doctrine of separation of powers violated?
Okay.
Now, when you say when one organ interferes with the other, can you explain further on that? I'm seeing answers when one organ interferes with the other. What do you mean? That is incomplete. You give examples. Don't just leave it hanging like that. So 3 of these answers are incomplete. Is it 2? Yes, please.
Hello?
Yes, I can get you.
I've just joined it, but I have a question from what I grasped from what you were saying about the separation of powers and the
Yes,
thing
please.
that you said in Zambia, no one is above the law. But so my question is that why is it that the president is the last person to sign the constitution? Yeah, that's the question. If no one is above, because if what's in the constitution is not in line with or is not of the same interest.
Thank you so much. When we say no one is above the law, what we mean is that everyone must be treated equally. That is basically fairness. We are simply talking about fairness. So the president equally is not above the law. That's what it means. But if you talk about the president performing his functions, I don't see any problem there because the Constitution is the one which provides for that. And also, we cannot dispute the fact that the president holds the highest office in the land. Therefore, there are certain privileges which he might have over and above us all. When you look at governance or statehood, a state must always have a leader. If a state has no leader, then it is not a state at all, regardless of who is heading a state at a particular time. Each state will have certain privileges which will accrue to the leader. Even in a company, if you're a senior member of staff, you'll find that there'll be disparities in the manner in which you are treated, maybe even in the salaries that you get. So this is what they talk about in human rights to say discrimination. Is discrimination good or bad? Well, I would say discrimination, it depends on how you apply it, but in certain circumstances, it is inevitable. It is just a fact. There's no way that a security guard, for example, can be given the same treatment as let's say the CEO of a company. That is not possible. So even with the president, there are certain functions, certain privileges that he will enjoy above and over all of us. But we cannot say that he's not. We cannot say that the president is not being. Let me say subject to Zambian laws, because it is the law of Zambia itself actually, which gives him those privileges. So I don't see anything illegal about that. So he is subject to the law of the land. You've seen past presidents being taken to court and so on. Whilst he's in office, yes, he has immunity. But that immunity, if it can be waived by parliament, I think there are procedures. The president can be impeached and so on. So he is subject to the law of the land. Okay. So there's an answer here. We're talking about how organs of government can interfere with the functions of the other. I can just give an example. If there's a case going on in court, this is just an example, and then maybe the executive wants to interfere with the outcome of that case, then that is what we call interference with the functions of the other organ. All right. So we've looked at some violations of the doctrine. And I think on the last part I was asking to say, is there separation of powers in Zambia? Depending on your answer, if you say no, what do you think must be improved to promote the doctrine of separation of powers?
Hello, madam.
Yes, please go ahead, so I can get you. You can go ahead, I can get you. You can go ahead. The president and the executive power must be decreased as they are too much. That is true. The president of Zambia enjoys so many powers. He's so powerful. That's why you might find that we're having challenges in a few areas until such a time when we try to regulate the powers of the president. Thank you so much. Now there's a question here about the position of the Bank of Zambia governor, subject to appointment and termination by the president. In short, it means that the president is the one who is mandated to appoint and remove the Bank of Zambia governor. That's what it means. And if you say it's not supposed to be interfered with by the president, the president might be a politician, but what you need to know is that once he becomes the president, he's the head of the state. And I think you need to appreciate the relationship between law and politics. So the law is not a human being which can operate independently. It needs people through which it can operate. And if the group of people is so huge, such as Zambia, maybe we're talking of 18 million people, we need a leader. And how can we choose this leader? It is through politics. And once he assumes office, he needs to follow what the law provides for. So we need to appreciate the fact that we have to look at our president, as a leader. Let's not look at him as a PF member of parliament or as a PF member that once he assumes that office, he's a president for all, whether you voted for him or not, whether you like him or not. Unfortunately, he's the president of Zambia. and appointing of certain office bearers, especially constitutional offices, are actually under the office of the president. You cannot dispute that. The only thing that we can question is, are people being appointed on merit? Are people being demoted on merit? Maybe those are the only things that we can question. Of which at this point, you and I don't have so much influence to say, even if we complain, things might not change. But the more we talk, we may see change in future in similar circumstances. And I've already explained that in Zambia there's a weak separation of powers, and people are saying the judiciary is not as independent as it should be. So that could be true because the president appoints the judges. So sometimes when a person is appointed by the other, we'll say that people might say that you can't bite a finger that feeds you. So maybe these people want to pay allegiance to show some kind of loyalty to the appointing authority. So at that point, so this is just a classical situation that I'm giving. It's just at that point where the independence can be compromised for fear of being removed from office. So if, for example, I pass a judgment today and the people in government are not happy with me, what will happen? We have such dangers. But if there's a judiciary which impressed me is the Malawian judiciary. I think that situation is classical, and African countries should try to emulate that. So you are supposed to maintain your integrity, whether you are speaking against the appointing authority, on provided it is the correct thing to do. It is better that we stick to the correct thing. Then that's when we can see justice in the country. But for as long as we compromise because of this and that, then we'll continue seeing the problems that we are facing. Public criticism is allowed, but to a certain extent. We have freedom of expression, but we need to be mindful of how we are doing that so that it does not amount to defamation of the president and other offenses. We might get in trouble because this criticism, even if it is directed to an individual, if you're not careful, you can still be sued. You call someone a witch, you call someone a prostitute, you call someone a thief. All those are not appropriate to be mentioned anyhow. Therefore, as much as we are exercising our freedoms, our human rights, so they call them, we need to know the limits within which we're supposed to operate. So basically, I think those are the main points that you find under separation of powers. Are there any questions?
Yes, madam.
Yes, please.
Would you say that corruption also affects the separation of powers?
Well, I would say so. There are so many things. There are so many things that you can look at. It is a bunch of issues that affect the value of separation of powers. So corruption, of course, is one of them. Any other questions? Any other questions?
Madam, I've got a question.
This one about the judiciary. If the judiciary fails, then unfortunately, justice becomes a challenge because we're saying the judiciary must be independent. So now, if they fail us, then we're in danger. There will be lawlessness in the country. There will be anarchy, unfortunately. So it is in hope that the judiciary must do as much as it can.
So it doesn't have who it answers to in a way.
The law. Everyone is operating under the law. Judges are under the law. That's what I can say.
Okay.
So someone is asking if I call someone a prostitute, and for sure that person is a prostitute, it still remains that you are wrong to say so. But first of all, why should you call someone a prostitute, even if they're a prostitute? Is it your problem? Yeah, you need to be careful because if they take you to court, unfortunately, you might have to pay them. Unless you justify that this person is, unless maybe you look at one of the defenses available under defamation. But I think it is not necessary for you to call a person that name. I don't think if it's in order. And I'm wondering under what circumstances you would call someone a prostitute. Why? So this is not allowed, actually. This is not allowed. Or calling someone to say, you are sick, you are finished, you are dead. Even if you know they are sick, please just know that that is an offense. And the next time you do that, you find someone who knows where to take you. You will pay them money. They can even take you to the local court. And you are going to pay them money. And especially if you say it in the presence of a third party who hears that information. And they begin to point at that person to say, listen, I heard that one is a prostitute. I heard that one is sick. Please stop doing that. Stop doing that. You must never do that. And the issue of saying that person is a prostitute, the question is, if you call them a prostitute, what benefit do you have? If I may ask. Is it your responsibility to be picking out prostitutes and those who are not prostitutes? That is not in order. I think the law has its own procedure to deal with prostitutes. Prostitution is illegal. If at all they are caught, then they should know how to deal with them. But I don't think if anyone has a responsibility to start finger pointing others, there are a lot of things which go on, which even you yourself, you could be indulging in, but no one has ever called you names. So let's be mindful of what we say. Even if you have evidence, I think that is not necessary. And there's another question to say, I'm saying the Malawian judiciary is doing well. It's simply because of the nullification of the presidential results, because the petition was taken to the Malawian courts. And the Malawian courts independently and objectively overruled the decision, or not the decision, but the results, the presidential results, and they held fresh elections. This is something which is not common in Africa. Even if there are petitions against elections, we have seen it here in Zambia twice or so. They never go through. They normally throw these petitions outside court. But the question that we need to ask ourselves is that when there's an issue of a petition, is the petition on merit or not? If it has some merit, then why throw it out? So now, if the Malawian judiciary took the time to try and study the situation and nullify the elections and definitely gave reasons as to why they did that, and fresh elections were held, then we're going to say that such a country has what are known as free and fair elections, one of the characteristics of democracy, because the judiciary has to be independent. Now, if a judiciary does not just act to try and uphold its position, because those judges actually took a risk. They took a risk. Because had things turned out the other way around, that the old president bounces back, can you imagine what would have happened to them? But they put justice first. They put their responsibility first, which is to protect the welfare of the citizen. So that is something which is commendable and which is very rare in Africa. So in such a case, we'll say that the Malawian judiciary, as at now, has formed what is known as a precedent, which very few African countries perhaps would display. It's very rare. We've seen it here in Zambia. It does not work. Any other questions? In terms of armed forces carrying out a coup, there's no law. There's no law which can prevent them. But of course, in the interest of security, of course, under the military wings, they have ways through which they can deal with such a situation. And this one falls under a serious offense, that is treason. Treason, unfortunately, will be applied after the offense is committed. But if you say laws to prevent, Laws to prevent may not necessarily be there, but just the general laws that we have to say maybe as a citizen of Zambia, we do this, duties of a citizen, do this. If we just follow and abide by those and respect our leaders, then we can avoid such situations. But there's no law which will personally maybe regulate me to say I should remain loyal. But there are laws which provide for these offenses and their punishment. Any other questions? Any other questions? Are there any other questions? Okay, if there are no other questions, I think it's almost time up. Thank you so much for your participation. So for today, we're going to end here. Let me just try to download this session, and then I'll be able to share the link. All right, thank you so much.
Hello, ma'am. Hello?